And there is no doubt, even like it has changed us. Whether we realize it now or not, there will be some, long-term consequences. I think in everywhere, the way we think, the way we see things, how we behave, like, there's going to be a bit of readjustment to kind of open up and be completely normal again, I guess.
Bonjour tout le monde. I'm going to do this whole podcast in bad French. No, I'm not really, but I am going to introduce Pierre Geoffroy from Abbiocco and Hampton wine store to Dirty Linen. Welcome, Pierre.
Hi, Dani. How are you?
Well, I'm really I'm good. I just feel like I just in post-lockdown swirl, and sometimes I feel really elated. Sometimes I feel just so tired. I often feel like I've got too many thoughts in my brain, and I just don't quite know where to reach for the next one. Um, but I think overall, I'm feeling optimistic. What about you?
Much the same. Like, I think, initially with the announcement that restaurants are going to reopen, uh, it happened, I guess, so spontaneously that there was an initial feeling of, I think, anxiety. And, just being a little bit scared because once again, we were going to have to adapt not one, but two businesses into, the unknown and outdoor dining. And it just kind of, in a way, I guess, it becomes quite hard to have to adapt so many times, which is what, everyone that's running a business through the pandemic and that's been affected has had to do. But I think now that we have, essentially, I think that the key thing and what we try to do is essentially just to write a list of what needs to be done, work through that list one thing at a time to get to that goal. And, finally being able to do that and get patrons in here has had its rewards. In the sense, it's very much so what we know how to do. Like, we've never done takeaway. We did it for the time that we had to. But, actually running a restaurant, even if it's limited and it's mostly outdoors, it's still, doable and viable for us. So we feel pretty lucky in that sense now. But, we're definitely exhausted.
Are you? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's Yeah, it's funny, you've said so much that I want to refer back to, and I think that's sort of what it's like at the moment. There's just so much packed into every moment, and even saying that seems funny because how much can you really pack into a lockdown where you're supposed to not be doing very much, but somehow it's very occupying. And as you said, there's so much change that you've had to deal with over the past 7 or 8 months, that there's just a lot that swirls around your mind. And I guess, in Melbourne, we've had this massive roller coaster of lockdown one, a brief reopening, lockdown two, which, seemed to go on for a long time. But even looking back now on the second lockdown, if I think about the fact that we were subject to a curfew, like that even just seems quite surreal from this point. I actually can't quite believe that that was our lives for a time.
Absolutely. And I think it's something we've never experienced. Well, personally, like, I've never, the only other times we've had a curfew has been during war times. I didn't think in my lifetime that, we would experience anything like it. Like, and I just remember actually, when the curfew kicked in and we were doing takeaway at both venues at this stage. And pretty much, one of the things I liked to do was pretty much get work done, do deliveries. But by about 8:30, everything kind of wraps up. And, I'm back home by about 9 o'clock. And generally, like, that's when I would get home and probably take the dog for a walk. And I just remember thinking, if I actually do that, I'm, committing a crime essentially, and just thinking just how crazy that was. So it's pretty full on.
I would stand at my door, lock the screen door in the evening and look outside and just think, I'm not allowed to go out there. And, when you just feel like I normally feel like I'm such a, I'm part of Melbourne and Melbourne's part of me. And, the fact that I couldn't go out at night, I couldn't go beyond my 5K. It's just, we're gonna look back on it, and we're not really gonna know how it's affected us, how it's changed us, and I think especially how it's impacted what we're really gonna value as we move forward in this crazy world. I think there's going to be layers and layers of this experience that we'll keep, yeah, we'll keep sort of peeling back or layering up. It's yeah, really, really interesting.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, all you did was ask me how I was, and it's just suddenly got all deep and philosophical. But I feel like that's part of the pandemic as well. It's been a lot about working out what's really important, yeah, who we really are.
Oh, definitely, massively. And there is no doubt, even like it has changed us as much as whether we realize it now or not. There will be some long term consequences. I think in every way, the way we think, the way we see things, how we behave, like I'm finding it, even though now we're allowed to travel to 25Ks, I probably haven't still gone out of my 5K radius. Like I'm just so used to that. I've just kind of stayed in that and stuck to those rules. And I think it's there's going to be a bit of readjustment to kind of open up and be completely normal again, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you. I'm south side, and I did go over north side over to Fitzroy last week on the first day of opening, and I felt sort of giddy with excitement, but also sort of dangerously unmoored. Like I and it was exciting, and it felt like I was seeing faces that I just hadn't seen. Driving along streets, and they were even going along Punt Road. It was very familiar. I even kind of loved the traffic for a while, but it was this strange clash of familiarity and absolute strangeness. Uh, I think if I think about going beyond the 25K when we're allowed to next week, going to regional Victoria, that's almost going to feel like I don't know, escaping or uh,
It is a bit, isn't it?
yeah. Yeah. It's really, really strange. It's strange how quickly you can adapt and get used to things.
Yeah, it really is.
Well, set the scene for us for people who don't know your two businesses, one of which you cleverly opened in the middle of the pandemic. And it was one of the few restaurants that I visited in that sliver of time in winter when we were allowed to go out. But yeah, just tell us a bit about yourself and about the businesses.
Yes, so pretty much I've got two businesses. The first one I opened with my business partners, who is Glenn Mill and Jared Amos. So the three of us essentially worked together for quite a few years at Jacques Remond, which was where we kind of had learned the core of our skill sets, and we stayed friends. Once we left Jacques Remond, and all of us kind of went our own way and went traveling and worked at other places. And pretty much after that, once we all kind of settled back in Melbourne, we just kept catching up on our days off, like on our hospitality weekend, which was usually like a Sunday night or Monday night, and we'd have dinner parties and cook for each other. And we pretty much all knew that we would, at some point we're ready to do our own thing. And the reality was that none of us individually had enough capital to be able to set off on our own. But we pretty quickly realized that we all kind of had the same dream. And if we actually collectively got together and put our money together, we had the potential to be able to do something. And that's pretty much how Hampton Wine Co came about. Glenn actually is the one that found the building, and we'd all grown up in Bayside, and we knew there was a bit of shortage in terms of bars and restaurants and places which were a bit classier and doing tapestry food and that sort of stuff. So we essentially signed a lease, jumped into it without really knowing too much about what it took to open up a business, and just got stuck into it. And then we opened Hampton in December 2015, which was good. So we've had that one up and running for about 5 years. So it's more of a European, uh, casual wine bar with tapestry European dishes with a bit of a modern twist to them. And more recently, we ventured into our second business, which is located in Highett, which is called Abbiocco Pasta and Wine Bar. And as you said, we actually went and opened that one after the first lockdown and pretty much threw the doors open, uh, to a lovely Italian pasta bar with all the pastas made in-house. And we essentially just went trading with limited numbers, so we could only do 20 in the indoor area. We could do a few in the front bar section, and we did that for about 2 weeks, and then we went into another lockdown.
Oh my God. You just worked out how to put the food on plates and suddenly you had to put it in boxes.
Essentially, yeah, that was it.
Wow. I mean, that's really a lot to deal with. I mean, opening a business is so much to take on anyway. And I suppose to open it in the optimism of our first reopening it felt pretty exciting. I was there and, it was good. But yeah, then everything sort of closed back down again. What tell me about, you obviously had staff in both businesses. Tell me how that all worked for you.
So pretty much we had, yeah, it's definitely staff at both venues. So we had the head chef at Hampton, who's from Brazil, and she's working with us full time. We had also Sonia, who's our manager at Hampton, who's been with us since we opened the doors, and we actually used to work with her at Jacques Ramond as well. So we had her as well, and then for the new venture, we had Pietro in the kitchen, who's Italian. Also had front of house, so James, who is also an ex-Jacques Ramond staff. So he was the full-time manager and is set to become the face of the business very much. And yeah, and then we had Glenn, Jared, and myself. And yeah, we just kind of decided that we would need to keep everything going because a lot of our staff weren't going to be eligible for JobKeeper. The new business was actually too new, so because we didn't have the tracking history, we weren't able to get anything from JobKeeper. So essentially, we just decided that we just had to keep doing whatever we had to do to keep it going. So essentially, Hampton we turned into a providor at the start, and then Abbiocco was just doing takeaway pasta, and I became a delivery driver. And we just kind of put our heads down and hoped that we'd be busy enough that we could keep paying everyone. So
And did you manage that?
we did manage that, which was great. So I
That's
think
amazing.
I think the worst stage we did have a couple of weeks that did get pretty slow. So when that happened, essentially we did have a chat to a couple of the staff and said, look, essentially we need to what do you need to live in the sense of paying your rent, food, all your bills and everything. And we'll essentially, if we can't match JobKeeper because the businesses are struggling too much, we'll make sure we can, support you enough that you don't have to have the worry of not being able to pay rent and, essentially live. So it was a bit touch and go at times, but yeah, it is full on. But
Yeah, like we were saying before, it's like that life becomes just really essential, doesn't it? It's really stripped back. It's like, what do you need to live? I mean, that is never a question that you would think you would need to, ask a staff member.
no, absolutely not. But I think that was the reality of it. And I guess for us, it was very much the case that we wanted to retain everyone. We wanted to stand by them when times were not ideal and pretty tough. But then, we can all thrive on the other end of this. And I guess now it very much so feels like, if anything, in many ways, I guess it has brought us closer. Like we probably, went into the lockdown as more work colleagues. And I guess we've kind of come out of it in some sense as a bit more of a family in some ways.
Wow, that's really beautiful. So, do you feel like there's that real web of loyalty among all the team now?
Oh, there's no doubt about it. You can just feel it, like when you're at work and working with everyone, and everyone's very now a lot more optimistic and just very keen to work hard and for the both businesses to do well and succeed, and that's exactly what it's doing. And I mean, we've also had staff members that have really, with their own initiative, stepped up. An example would be we have a girl that actually started with us at Hampton pretty much once we reopened after the first lockdown, and she essentially started working with us because she wanted to learn more about wines. And she didn't really, when we went into the second lockdown, she was very humble about it, but she did say to us, she's like, I do have some cocktail experience. If you want, I can, put a few cocktails together and we can see if we can sell them for takeaway. And little did we know, she'd actually worked with some of the, amazing bartenders in Southeast Asia, and her cocktail knowledge was phenomenal. And to the point that I think it was the last Saturday before we lifted restrictions, we sold, I think it was close to about 150 cocktails, just between 4 and 7 o'clock as takeaways. So like that just lifted the business. Suddenly cocktails was doing about 50% of sales,
Wow.
which was amazing. So full credit to the staff.
Yeah.
Oh, it was great.
That's so good. One of the things that seems to have been a bit of a feature of the pandemic is that those neighborhood restaurants that are really well supported by locals have done better than city restaurants that depend on people in offices. Abbiocco was so new. I mean, how did Highett and I'm really thrilled to hear that you were able to keep everybody on and through the takeaway. What do you think? Like, how did Highett sort of take you into its arms and support you through the pandemic?
You definitely felt it that because we didn't have the track record that Hampton had. So Hampton straight away had, regulars and the whole community really getting right behind it from the get-go. Abbiocco, I guess, was a lot slower because we just didn't get a chance to really cement ourselves in the community for very long. It was only a couple of weeks that we were trading for. So that was definitely, an obstacle that we definitely had. But then I guess what we try to do is essentially, just make our food more accessible through, a better ordering platform online. Trying to do cocktails as well, which Emily, the bartender from Hampton, was batching up at Hampton and sending down to us for us to sell. It was, I guess, like we just didn't stop trying to do new things, trying to find ways to make more money. Then we started doing cook at home boxes. We just constantly tried new things and added on top of what we were doing to just essentially get more trade. And I think that determination just kind of pushed it across the line to be able to keep everyone on, to make enough money to, pay all the staff and what we needed to pay, and just to be able to survive, really.
Wow. So let's talk about reopening. And you said at the start it's kind of an alarming prospect when you first hear about it. Tell me about that process and what it's been like to get customers back through the doors.
Yeah, so, oh God, it's just a lot of adapting once again. So, pretty much, I had it in my mind that when we would come out of restrictions, essentially, we would go back to what trading was like, before the second lockdown, so which was 20 people inside of the dining room. But once again, it was changed. So now it's 10 people maximum in one space. So essentially everything just had to be readapted once again. So it's just you needed to tweak your reservation system so that it reflected that. You needed to update your menus to whatever wines were now available, and new vintages would have changed, and everything just we had to go through everything and just adapt every step of the business essentially. So it was quite a lot of work, but I think, everyone came to work super early. We just wrote down what had to be done and just worked our way through the list one step after another. So one person would focus on getting outdoor furniture ordered, uh, you know, just everything that had to be done to be able to reopen. And then we ended up actually doing like a staggered reopening. So Hampton Wine Co. we opened on Thursday, and that was the reason for that was essentially we didn't open on the Wednesday because we just couldn't be ready by that day. But we did open Hampton on the following day, on the Thursday. And Jared, who's the head chef and one of the three owners, was in the kitchen in there with Maria, a Brazilian chef, to essentially go through the whole menu with her that night. And then the next day, on the Friday nights, Jared was back at Abbiocco, and that's when we threw those doors open and, had a full restaurant with the restrictions, just doing 2 sittings, which were both completely full. Because obviously everyone's been very keen to get back out and eat out again. And I think that there's been a bit of pressure from that as well, in the sense that, like the rush of people trying to get bookings and being so frantic about getting back into restaurants is in some ways quite similar to the franticness that we saw of, Woolies shelves not having any toilet paper. Like it's I've never seen people trying to get bookings so aggressively, I guess, in some ways, because they are so keen to get back out. So just every channel that people can potentially reach out to you is just overloaded. So you'll essentially Dan was still making the announcement and the phones were just ringing while he's doing the announcement. Emails are coming in, your socials, your phone's going off because Instagram's getting messages every, 10 seconds, and it just went crazy. So anyway, essentially we just kind of, let it all kind of die down a bit. And then after that, we just promoted that the reservation system was now up and running and for people to jump back on, because it was just too overwhelming to have to go through every single phone call or reach every person individually. It's not a case that we didn't want to do it, but it was more of a case of it's okay. We've got 3 days to open. We need to focus our energy on just getting the restaurant ready. Like we can't, spend a whole day trying to chase everyone up. It's just not how we can use our time, essentially.
It's not the best use of time.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't want no one to reach out, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Big
Don't
time.
want no one to call.
Big time.
So I mean, it's great that there's that enthusiasm, but then it's like, yeah, how do you sort of channel it in a way that is actually, uh, yeah, practical for getting people into the restaurant at the right time? I heard something crazy from somebody this morning that they were offered $500 to let a group of people into their restaurant.
Wow.
It's like, whoa.
That is
So people
intense.
are desperate.
Oh, massively.
Yeah, it's really
Yeah.
intense. So what about once people have got their reservation? I mean, have you found that people are amenable to the restrictions you've got in terms of, they have to clear the table at a certain time, that they need to stay seated? What's the sort of customer behaviour been like?
It's generally speaking, it is pretty good. Like I'd say, the vast majority of people are absolutely doing the right thing and being conscious that this is not essentially potentially not over, and that we still have a part to play in staying COVID safe. So there's, for the most part, there's no problem. People come in, they've got their mask, we take them to the table, explain to them that once they're at the table, then they can remove their mask. But if they're to go to the toilet or, move around the venue, they need to pop it back on. And everyone's, they're so happy to be able to not cook for themselves and to be served by someone and to enjoy a meal that they are respecting. I think in many ways it somewhat resets the rules, and it's given restaurateurs an opportunity to be like, okay, these are now the rules, and this is how our restaurant works, and you have to respect that, because at the end of the day, it is our house, and that's how people have received it for the most part. I do think there's a few people that are like well and truly over the lockdown. So we've had a couple of people come in and, they're not wearing a mask, and they just want to go back to everything being normal. And in our case, it's just a case of telling them that it's, what they have to do. politely, of course, and usually people are pretty understanding that and do it. Like we haven't had any backlash or anyone argue or anything like that, which is good. So fingers crossed. I'm sure it'll stay that way.
Yeah. And do you have a minimum spend, and do you take credit card details? How are you managing that side of things?
We're not. So we're pretty much just going on, like trusting people to do the right thing. Obviously, if it gets to so far so good. If it does get to a point where that does become an issue, and we get it, you can't have a table of six not show in a space dedicated to 10 people and lose that much revenue, obviously. So it's the kind of thing that it's like let's see if people do the right thing. If they don't, then we'll adapt accordingly and take credit card details and so on. But so far we haven't had to do that, which is great.
Yeah, that's really good. Pierre, I'd love to just sort of reach back to the Jacques Raymond history and ask you to draw a bit of a through line from that grand contemporary fine dining setting, very wine focused, quite formal. And can you draw a line through to the more, I guess, the very accomplished but more casual dining that you're offering today, and then continue with this project and look into the future and have a little bit of a stab about where you think Melbourne dining is going. Can you sort of draw that history for us?
Yeah, so I guess the Jacques Raymond years for all three of us owners was such a formative period of our careers. Like I think for us to be able to work at a restaurant that was then, one of the only, I think when I worked, I was there for 7 years altogether. I think Jared was there for about five, and Glenn would have been there for about 5 or 6 years as well. So essentially, we were quite young, probably early 20s. And I guess that's where we very much so, got molded into the hospitality workers that we then went on to become. And it was, a time where we're surrounded by amazing people to work with, such as Chris Young, who was Metro D there for quite a long time, and has won many awards for his amazing skills. And we had Natalie Ramond, who was the head sommelier, and she, eventually passed on that knowledge to me and Glenn over many years. And then there was Jacques, who, such a big personality. Like I think, in Melbourne, for me anyway, like he was really the chef's chef, and he was always there. He was always in the kitchen. His attention to detail was second to none, and he's a perfectionist. And so I guess when you learn in that setting, it does set the standard quite high. And I think the way we've kind of moved forward, as now we go into our own businesses, is essentially we didn't want to do fine dining, but we do find in a way that our places are definitely more casual, but there is still that element of all school service, really looking after people and being hospitable, like we were taught by the Ramonds. Uh, it's almost like there's this aspect of fine dining that we just can't shake off. Like if we pour a glass of Pinot, it has to be in a Pinot Noir glass. It can't just be in a regular stem. And I don't think that's a bad thing at all. Like I think you can offer, more casual dining in terms of your setting, how you present your food, but still have standard that it should be extremely delicious and the best food that you can possibly produce, and to give the best service that you can possibly give, and create a pretty amazing experience without being a fine dining restaurant essentially.
Mm. I mean, do you think that there's a place for those restaurants? I mean, I've heard different theories and I've mulled it over myself. As we come through the pandemic, fingers crossed, and we go there's obviously some people who have got less money. Many people have luckily retained their jobs. We're going to lose a lot of restaurants, unfortunately. I just wonder, where is it gonna fall? Is it going to fall to the lower end? Is it going to be crowded in the middle as it was, pre-pandemic? Is there going to be more of a place for those special occasion restaurants because we appreciate dining so much more and we are willing to spend for those special experiences? What do you think, Pierre?
I think, look, I do think there'll always be room for top restaurants like your Atticas and Bray. Um, I think there'll always be enough people that have the financial stability to be able to support and go to these restaurants. And I think also there's special occasion restaurants. So, people might save a long time to be able to dine at those places. And I do think a lot of them will be fine and will survive. If anything, there might be maybe a fewer of them. And I do think that, moving forward, and that's the way for me that restaurants have gone for a long way, is in a sense, restaurants have kind of tweaked that if people want to just come in and spend, $40 a head, they can. But if they want to go all out and spend $200 a head, they can also do that. And I guess, now I think it's going to be a case of restaurants are going to be more open to uh, turning tables, doing multiple sittings, and becoming a little bit crafty in that regards, to make it work, essentially. I think in the lower end, I think that will always survive. I think there will always be room for, your cheaper style of restaurant, whether it's your faux restaurants on Victoria Street or, your takeaway kind of places. So, yeah, if anything, I think it'll just be a reduction on the top end and people may be a little bit more cautious of how they spend their money.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, I did drive down Victoria Street the other night and it was dire. Like, so many
I can
businesses look
imagine.
permanently closed. It's really
Oh, God.
looking pretty tragic. I really hope that there's some life comes back to that strip. But there are so many people reopening, and that's so wonderful. Obviously, it's not simple to reopen. It's not financially viable without government support for a lot of businesses. But there are some businesses that sadly we are not going to welcome back, and I think we'll see businesses tumbling, certainly post March when JobKeeper finishes, if indeed that's what happens. But how are you? Are you generally feeling optimistic about the summer to come and onward?
Yeah, I'd definitely say so. Like, I think just seeing, cases were once again, I think, zero today, which is terrific news. And I think, like, seeing, what's made me somewhat optimistic as well was just seeing how optimistic everyone was to once again be able to do more activities. So, whether it's other visiting families and friends and going to restaurants and so on. So I I do feel for us being suburban restaurants has been in some ways, and actually not being big restaurants, like both can only do about 70 covers normally. And we're lucky to have multiple rooms. So, we've been in a position that we've been able to adapt. And there's almost a sense that people at the moment prefer to stay local and support local. Like, they're not going to venture into the city just yet to go for a meal, but they'll happily come to the wine bar and have a few snacks and a glass of wine and so on. But I'm pretty optimistic that if we can manage the pandemic and keep numbers fairly low, like Sydney, New South Wales has done, for example, that there's no reason that we can have a great summer. A lot of businesses can get back up and running, and hopefully people can use the opportunity as we've had to adapt so much and keep doing the same and do it with a good attitude. I guess create awesome outdoor spaces. Get musician out on the street playing some music. Just do. It'll be different to what it was, but let's make it fun and have a good vibe about it, I guess.
Yeah, I reckon if you're a Victorian restaurateur, like nothing will ever be harder. And you're so good at adapting and innovating. And what bigger mountain could you try to climb than the one that you've already climbed, scaled, and just owned? So yeah, Pierre, you've mentioned writing a list a couple of times, and I would just love to finish by asking you about your list, because I'm such a believer in writing down a list of things to do. It always makes me feel so much calmer. But I would just love I'd love to know exactly what sort of lists do you write, like, and how do you divvy it up between all the different people?
Yeah, so it's pretty basic, and I think funnily enough, I'd worked a few years at Hotel Gitan, which is the Ramond children's one of their restaurants, and it was actually their youngest son, Antoine Ramond, who got me onto the whole list thing, because that was his thing to do, and this was when we were doing the opening for their venue, and he was like, there's literally so much going on that if you remember 75% of what needs to be done, you're going to forget a bunch of other things. And so his thing was always to, essentially write a list and just tick things off as you do them. And I guess in many ways that's what we've done, where we've gotten together and it's like, okay, what needs to be done? And it's setting up the reservation system. We need to put new items in the menu. We need to, wash all the glasses in the bar. We need to wipe down all the plates. We need to do a deep clean. We need to order wines. And essentially, once you've written everything that you need to do, we looked at it with all the stuff in there for each business, and then allocated jobs in a way that whoever was the most skilled person to do that task would take it on, and just chipped at it and ticked things off as we went through it until everything was done, and then threw the doors open.
Wow, so good. I will just pass on my piece of advice for anybody writing a list, is that it is perfectly acceptable to write something that you've already done on the list and then cross it off. And that is always a good start to a list. Definitely makes you feel better. Uh, Pierre, thank you so much for coming along and having a chat. I really appreciate it. And yeah, good on you for getting all your staff through this second lockdown. It's a massive achievement. And yeah, I really wish you the most amazing summer as you look after your local neighbourhoods and give them beautiful food, great wine in the correct glassware, and of course, amazing cocktails.
Sounds good, and thank you so much, Danny. Really appreciate the time to speak with you, and definitely a big thank you as well for everything that you've done for the industry.
All right, I'll see you for a drink soon. Thanks, Pierre. This is Dirty Linen, and I'm Dani Valent. We air the issues that the hospitality industry finds hard to talk about. We spend a week thrashing around each issue, hearing from different people with unique perspectives. We want to hear from you as well. If you have something that needs to be said about a topic, get in touch so we can include your perspective. Contact us at dirtylinen@deepintheweeds.com.au or hit us up on Insta at Dirty Linen Podcast. We can't wait to hear from you.
This is a Deep in the Weeds production.